Hello class and welcome to Module 8. Today we're coming to you from Midland, Odessa, Texas, where we're stopping off here at Blue Bell Ice Cream. Now, I can't actually buy any ice cream here. This is just their warehouse, but I did go and stop at Albertsons and pick up a pint of Blue Bell ice cream. I've never actually tried Cookie Two-Step, so this is going to be a new experience for me. One of my favorite flavors is Butter Crunch. Interestingly enough, Butter Crunch is in the middle of a recall right now. Not here in Texas, but in several states. And the reason being is their Alabama plant had a piece of plastic found inside one of the pints of Blue Bell ice cream. And so out of an abundance of caution, they went ahead and recalled all the Blue Bell Butter Crunch ice cream found at that location. Excuse me while a truck drives by. Now, Blue Bell, as you might be aware of, was involved in a pretty serious situation back in 2015. In March of 2015, some of the ice cream, they recalled 10 different types of ice cream because of a listeria outbreak. And in 2015, they ended up having to recall several million gallons of ice cream. It put the company on the brink of bankruptcy. Now in 2018, they started to make their comeback, and one of their techniques, one of the things that they've elected to do is go forth with transparency. And so far that's been working. They've been pretty transparent. This situation, this latest recall, I think is an example of that. Now again, they found a small piece of plastic in one of the Blue Bell ice cream, one of the gallons of Blue Bell ice cream that came from their Alabama plant. But they went ahead and elected to, out of an abundance of caution, recall all of the ice cream that came from there in case somebody did end up getting some ice cream with a piece of plastic in it and accidentally ingesting it. Again, it was a Butter Crunch, not the Cookie Two-Step. I'm going to go ahead and try this because this is my first time actually trying this particular flavor. Blue Bell's excellent, I gotta say. It's a great ice cream. Now, interestingly enough, in 2015, the same time Blue Bell was on the brink of bankruptcy because of this listeria outbreak and because of having to recall so much ice cream, they were able to bounce back. But the same year, in September of 2015, a CEO was put in jail. The CEO of Peanut Corporation of America was found so negligent that it became criminal. Now, we talked about negligence in earlier classes. We talked about the effect of negligence and putting out a product that could be harmful. In this instance, it crossed over into the criminal sphere, and that's what this week's lecture is about. That's what this week's chapter is about, is criminal law. Now, criminal law, as I've mentioned, doesn't really have a lot to do with business law. They usually do not intertwine with each other. But when it came to this particular situation with Peanut Corporation of America, it did. You see, in this situation, there was salmonella. A lot of the peanuts that were produced in this particular plant were contaminated with salmonella. Again, that's similar to what happened to Blue Bell, but Blue Bell took the right steps and initiated a recall. They began to investigate where it was coming from and how to stop that. That's what they did in 2015, and by doing the right thing, it pushed them on the brink of bankruptcy. They needed a $125 million bailout, if you will, from one of their investors in order to maintain operations. But Blue Bell does have a very loyal client base, and their actions and transparency, I think, has helped them bounce back. The Peanut Corporation of America took the opposite approach. They came out saying there was no salmonella outbreak. They refused to accept evidence that their peanuts were contaminated. In fact, in some instances, when peanuts tested positive for salmonella, they simply retested it until it tested clean, and then they shipped it out. The CEO, a man named Stuart Purnell, actually had emails that were very incriminating to him in his criminal case. In one instance, he had said, when they said they were waiting for the results of salmonella testing, he had said, go ahead and ship it. He didn't say it quite in those words, but he said, just ship it. Don't wait for the results, ship it. In 2015, in September of 2015, he was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison for his role in distributing contaminated, salmonella-contaminated peanuts that led to the death of 9 people and one of the worst outbreaks of salmonella in the country. Now, Peanut Corporation of America is no longer in business. They have gone out of business. Blue Bell is still in business, and they are going strong. They are coming back strong. But again, if you purchase some Blue Bell ice cream if you purchased some Blue Bell Butter Crunch ice cream recently, just be aware there was a recall recently, a voluntary recall. So just be aware of that. But here in Midland, Odessa, there's another corporation that is infamous for its role in crossing the line between business law and criminal law. And we're going to head over there right now, class. So here we are, folks. This unassuming building is going to be the site of the rest of our lecture here today. It doesn't look like much, but well, we're going to get into why it's important and how it connects to the material at hand. Looking inside, I couldn't find anywhere to eat. I couldn't find a coffee shop or anything. Really, I couldn't find much of anything. There's like nobody here. So I was able to walk around, take a little bit of video, take a few pictures, and use it in the class. But unassuming building, it's a standard office building. Not much going on here. Let's go ahead and step outside and we'll start with our lecture here. Well, class, we went ahead and left the Blue Bell factory in Odessa. We came down about 20 miles down here to Midland, Texas. And we're here at this very unassuming office building. This building may not look like much. It may not look like a particularly historic building, and there's certainly no food there. Don't worry, I've checked. But it is a very important example of business law and criminal law intersecting. This building here was once part of a large corporation that some of you may have heard of called Enron. Now, Enron was founded in 1985, and it soon became one of the most well-known and well-respected and highly regarded companies in America. Fortune magazine, for 6 years in a row, voted it the most innovative company in America, and many investors were flocking to Enron stocks because it was such a highly regarded stock. Its growth was unbelievable, and many people were investing in Enron because it seemed like a surefire stock. The stock prices were climbing every year, and every year their reports were coming out showing that they had quite a large amount of assets and very little debt. And they were even releasing information indicating that they foresaw even more growth in the coming years. Enron was a can't-miss prospect, but it turns out Enron was built on a house of lies. See, to basically summarize how Enron ended up starting what history knows as the Enron scandal, well, we're not going to be able to fit in this video. We're not going to be able to fit in this class. You could teach an entire class on the Enron scandal and only scratch the surface. And it's pretty complex. There's a lot of moving parts to it. There's a lot of confusing aspects to it. But to try and summarize it as best I can, the issue with Enron was twofold. Number one, a scheme called mark-to-market. What Enron had done was they sort of fudged their numbers in terms of their assets. For example, they would sign contracts where they anticipated, say, $100 million in revenue based on this contract. Sometimes the contract would be canceled. Sometimes the contract would not pan out. They would still recognize that $100 million of anticipated revenue, even though all evidence pointed otherwise. That's a very, very simplified summary of what mark-to-market is and how it applied to Enron. But more severely, and more importantly, what they did was they hid their debt. Now, Enron's company was so popular with investors because it had a lot of assets and it didn't seem to have any debt. It seemed to not owe hardly any money to anybody. That in turn was entirely a lie, because what Enron did was, basically, to summarize it, to simplify it, is they created dummy companies, shell corporations if you will, and they would pass all their debt to these shell corporations and separate it from their company. Now, these shell corporations were still basically part of Enron. They were still under the umbrella of Enron, but they were able to leave those companies and those debts off their books as a result of hiding it in these companies. By moving this debt to these companies, they were able to mislead investors who thought that they didn't owe that much money and therefore was a very safe, very reliant company. In 2001, the bottom fell out, the truth came out, and Enron stock dropped from a high of $90, over $90, to less than $1. I think they closed out around 50 cents before the company finally declared bankruptcy. Many people, lost their life savings investing in Enron, and these investments were based on a lie. Many employees, Enron at its peak had over 29,000 employees, and almost all of these employees had their retirement, their 401k, tied into Enron stock. All of these employees, not only did they lose their job, but they all lost their employment as well. They all lost their 401k and their retirement, and any employee who invested his own money in Enron stock lost all their money from that investment as well. This was highly unethical, and we talked about business ethics in earlier classes. This is an example of very unethical behavior. In fact, this is so unethical that you could almost see Jordan Belfort in that movie clip that we watched earlier saying, no, this is almost too much. In actuality, he probably wouldn't have done that, but the point being made is this is a great example of unethical behavior, but where it fits into this week's material is it crossed into unethical, into criminal. You see, the CEO of Enron was a man named Ken Lay. He was a man who founded the company in 1985. The CEO and COO was a man named Jeffrey Skilling. Both men were charged, as well as others in Enron, but both men were charged with crimes. They were charged with conspiracy, security fraud, bank fraud, and they were eventually convicted of their role in this Enron scandal. Now, Kenneth Lay died before he was sentenced, so his conviction was ultimately vacated. Jeff Skilling was convicted. His case did go up to the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court, but ultimately he was convicted. He is set to be released this year. But this was a very cautionary tale for a lot of CEOs and a lot of CFOs and a lot of companies. And you note how different this was from the actions of Blue Bell when they were faced with a scandal. They took a policy of transparency. They basically said to folks, this is what's going on right now. It's bad, but we're going to let you know what's going on. Now, is Blue Bell going to be sued? Almost certainly. I'm sure there is a lawsuit against Blue Bell right now because of the listeria outbreak. I'm sure that Blue Bell has had to pay millions in settlements with a lot of people who sued their company for negligence. But it has not crossed into the criminal realm, because unlike with the peanut company, unlike with Enron, there was not the misleading, there was not that criminal intent to mislead investors, mislead customers, and mislead individuals that we saw with Enron. So Enron, comparing Enron to Blue Bell, comparing Enron and the peanut company to other companies that have gotten into trouble before that we've talked about in the past, such as that Volkswagen, when we talked about the Volkswagen case. This is very different because of that criminal intent to mislead, and so that's a very important distinction. Again, we don't have a lot of intersection between business law and criminal law, but Enron is one of the best examples of where those two worlds can collide. Class, I hope you enjoyed this week's lecture. Be sure to read your material, keep on top of the assignments. We will catch you next week for our next module. Thanks, class.